So we are moving into our second session of the day. This is going to be Broodmare Marketing and Admin. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to time and appropriately market your horse in terms of when is a good time to make the decision to retire, between that point and how much time should you give a mare to kind of recover her body before you list that horse, considerations that you need to take into account when choosing a home for a retired broodmare. And also just the ins and outs of keeping track of broodmares and their progeny. So all of the resources and websites that are available and the tips and tricks for how to navigate those different websites. With us for this session is Hillary Ramspacher. She's the Equine Administrator and Sales Coordinator for Burleson Farm. She's also a independent rehoming agent. Hillary is a lifelong equestrian and graduate of the University of Kentucky, currently overseeing the admin office and commercial sales consignment at Burleson Farms. She's blended her passion for equestrian sport and thoroughbred racing, leading to a thriving small business dedicated to rehoming OTTBs into second careers, and more recently, repurposing retired thoroughbred broodmares as well. Hillary enjoys competing in the hunters, and she's also a veteran of our thoroughbred makeover competition. So, welcome, Hillary.
Okay, so to start us off, the marketing of the broodmare, I look at it's pretty much the same as marketing any kind of horse off the track, or any horse for that matter. The representation that you're going to put online out there is what people are going to see. So you want that ad to be really thorough, but most importantly, honest evaluation of the horse. You don't want to be hiding anything. It's not going to help you or the buyer. You're going to be a waste of everybody's time. So when you're writing up that ad, you want to make sure it includes everything that is pertinent to that horse that a buyer is going to want to see. I like to write my ads from the buyer's perspective so that I want to be asked the least amount of questions as the seller. So in that ad, I'm going to have my must-haves, which is going to be the location of the horse. It doesn't have to have a farm name or anything, but at least the city and state of where the horse is at, the age of that horse, the gender of it. For these thoroughbreds specifically, I do like to include the sire and the dam as well as the dam sire, because I do find that dam sire line is important to secondhand people. I also like to write up what I believe the horse is most suitable for in that second career. With these broodmares especially, because they're going to have been off the track for so long, it's most of them as will be, that can be a little bit harder to judge because they're going to be in full-blown mommy mode. They're not really going to look like athletes anymore for the most part. So you're really going to need to have a vision of that and see how they move and what they're most naturally going to be good at. I find that a lot of the broodmares do well into a more of an eventing career, and I think that that's, at least to start, helps because it's the 3 different disciplines all in one, and it gives them a chance to get their fitness back and figure out what they're good at. And the dressage background is really good for any horse, even if it only events for a short period of time. You know, years from now, it might be able to go into another discipline and succeed at that as well. With the broodmares, the soundness can be a little bit tricky because by the time that they are ending their broodmare careers, they might not be with the initial connections. Most likely, they won't be with the initial connections that had them at the track or at their initial retirement. So the person selling you that horse or listing that horse truly might not know what reason it came off the track for. So you just need to be aware of that risk and do your due diligence and do a pre-purchase and make sure you get eyes on it and good photos to see if there's any issues that you might be too afraid to move forward with. From the visual aspect of your sale ads, I always say that no photo is better than a bad photo. So you really need to make sure that you get a quality image. I like a very solid confirmation photo, which I have some examples here. These aren't perfect by any stretch, but you can see they all are a good representation of the horse that we had in front of us. For example, this top one here, like her hocks are covered in the back, but you have a good overall image of her top line, and believe it or not, that was a broodmare. Here is a filly that was straight off the track, and again, you know, I actually prefer them photos to be on the left side, but these horses stood better facing to the right. I would prefer to see more of that left front leg on this one, but overall, it's a pretty picture. It's a clean background. There's nothing distracting from it. Here is another broodmare that, well, she was a maiden mare that didn't take, that they decided to quit on beforehand. She actually will be competing in the makeover this year. It's a good quality photo. Here there's a clean background. My one complaint here would be this neck strap. I find that a lot of people outside of the thoroughbred industry don't know what neck straps are. So if you're around this area, you probably have seen hundreds of horses with ones like that. But outside of the central Kentucky area, a lot of people think that's a cribbing collar. So I try to take them off of any photos that I have just to avoid that complication. And then this mare here is a seasoned broodmare that we rehomed last year. As you can see, she's in much more of a mom body there with her belly there, but she was able to go right back to work and fit right back up. So she's actually fox hunting now in Virginia and had no problems going back to work at all. This is an example of one of my full ads that I like to use for it, where you have good quality photos on both sides of the horse. You can see all their legs, and it's a high quality image so that you can zoom in and actually see the conformation of the legs, if there's any blemishes or scratches, anything like that, that a buyer might be questioning. And then I also like to include a headshot like that where there's a kind, soft eye, where the mares look their best, and not like they can sometimes look. I also like to include good video as well, even if it's just off your iPhones are really great now. You can take a good image off of that, and then with the videos, in addition to, you can take screenshots like these and include them in your ads. But I think it's really important to advertise the horse you're listing, in the sense that if you're saying it's jumping 3 foot already, you should have video of it jumping 3 foot already. Don't then have a video of it trotting over cross rails. Oh, it's not. So the reasons that I've found most commonly, at least, for retirements of these broodmares have been reproductive problems. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll have any kind of lasting complication that would affect their sport horse career, but they can either be unsound for breeding, they could have had foaling complications that have led the owners to not want to continue in a broodmare career for the safety of the horse. And then it can also be, a lot of mares will have difficulties getting in foal in the first place or keeping their foals, which will cause their owners to just decide to call them from their commercial herd and try to repurpose them into a new career. The more growing, or the commercial atmosphere here in Kentucky does require a decent pedigree to stay competitive in. So when you get a lower end mare it doesn't have enough of a page to really be viable in this market, previously the trend would be to send them on down into a regional market. I've noticed more recently that I'm being contacted to list those horses instead for a new career, rather than send them on for the safety of the horse. It's not to say that good mares don't end up in regional markets, but that tends to be the track that they take to get to a not so great place at the end. So rather than seeing the mare end up in a bad spot 6 years from now, they're asking me to rehome them in advance and just end their broodmare careers before they head down to that regional market. And then a more uncommon reason for retirement would be a genetic infertility aspect of it, which I ran into last year. We had a mare that had been bred twice. They couldn't get her in foal, and she ended up having an extra chromosome. So she would never be able to be a mare, but she was bred, so she counts as a broodmare now. So some concerns as a buyer and a seller for these broodmares into a new career. Like I mentioned earlier, the soundness history of these mares can somewhat be in question. So not the people who had these horses on the racetrack, who are most likely the ones that are going to have a better idea of their true soundness, may not be the ones selling the horse at this point in time. So you have to go into that as a buyer with an open mind and a little bit of a gamble to see if it's something you want to take, and make sure that the possibility of it not working out is something you can financially afford as well as emotionally handle. These mares have been spending most of their time out in a field right now by the time you're going to be having them listed. So like their feet might be a little broken up. These broodmares tend to have wider, flatter feet. A lot of them aren't in shoes. So there's a lot of foot maintenance that you can do to bring them back pretty quickly. But you just have to be aware that when you're going to look at one of those mares, you might see some of these problems. But that doesn't necessarily mean the mare's bad-footed or will have any kind of lasting effects. The other big concern I always tell everybody who's shopping my broodmares is the mom bod. You have to be able to look past that. Anybody who's had any children knows how much that changes everything. So you have to be willing to help correct that top line. The broodmare feet are another tough one. I always recommend that people get with a good farrier right away. Don't try to go the barefoot route in that initial aspect. You'll benefit more from being a little bit more aggressive in the beginning. And in the actual bringing back to work process of these mares, you're gonna wanna do more like long and low type stuff, lots of trotting, lots of hills, lots of strengthening exercises will benefit these mares more than going at it a little bit harder. When you're getting them straight off the track, it's a lot easier to just go right back into work with them. But these mares have been let down so long that it's much more beneficial to build the correct muscle by going a little bit slower. And then, in my opinion, one of the hardest things to overcome with some of these broodmares is their mental state, just because they are so used to being out in the fields and living this a little bit of a feral life, even though they come in during the breeding seasons and when they have their foals. But for the most part, they're living like horses, and they may not be so keen on our idea of bringing them back to work. So just to be aware that that initial transition period might be a little hard for them as they start to come back in the barns and see new things. But I do think that they make good candidates for it. Having foals like that can really humble some of these mares and make really good riding partners later on. So to touch on the jockey club stuff here, over the last 20 years or so, the foal crop has pretty significantly decreased. It's cut almost in half now from where it was. And with that middle market range of horses in every aspect, from the 2-year-olds, weanlings, yearlings, broodmares in the commercial market, that middle buyer is getting harder and harder to get to. And because of that, you're always going to have buyers for the big money horses, and you're always going to have buyers for these cheap horses. But and that's that middle market that's getting a little bit harder to move the horses in. And with that, a lot of those mares are coming out of this pool of commercial breeding. And I've been looking to try to help in repurposing them rather than sending them on somewhere else. If they're not they're not sound enough for riding purposes, there's a lot of good recip programs you can get mares into as well, so they can still carry babies and have a useful career, even if they're not sound enough to continue on as riding horses. But with this decline in the jockey club foal crop here in North America, there's a lot more mares going to be left needing some sort of new career. So with these mares, they're obviously most of them are going to have a few foals at minimum. Some of them will have a lot more than that. So an added fun aspect of bringing a broodmare, especially to the Retired Racehorse Project, is the ability to follow up on the foals that they do have on the ground. For example, we sold one last year that her only surviving foal is now a graded stakes winner. She's unfortunately, all of her other foals had passed away in random things, but her buyers now have big barn parties every time that foal's is running. And you can track all of these things. If you're not an industry person from the thoroughbred side, Equine Line is my favorite way to look any of this stuff up. You do have to pay for the reports on there or have a subscription, but it is more inclusive and easier to sort through, in my opinion. The mare produce record is probably the easiest, most inclusive report that they have on there as far as these broodmares are concerned. And then you can also run any kind of pedigree on there as well. Equibase, as most of you probably know from RRP things, is free for everybody, and it's easy to search, but you might have to do a little bit more digging. What I find some people don't know is they do have a dam foal search option if you dig through it far enough, where you can look up any of their actively racing foals. Just be aware that there is a chance that if it was never named, it might not be on there. And then if you do want to follow along any of their foals, you can add those racehorses onto your virtual stable and get all the emails and updates as they're running through their careers. In my listing of all the off-the-track thoroughbreds that I do, I see a lot of the pedigree query pedigrees listed on the ads, and I just want to warn, it is because you can go in and edit it. I've seen a lot of incorrect things come up on there, so just be aware, and you might want to do a little bit more research if that's the only pedigree you're going off of. So this is an example of the mare produce record, just so you guys can see what it is. You have here the mare's entire pedigree, what all of her information is going to be in that top line, her foaling date, what she most recently sold for, and if you do click on that, you can find out where she went through the sale. And then her race earnings here, and then below her will list every year that since she raced until current. You can see this mare in particular had a lot of not so great luck as far as the reproductive side of things. And if they don't have a foal, it can say no report. It'll say bred to, so you can see what her entire produce history is. This is the example of the same mare from an Equibase standpoint. You can see it does have part of her pedigree up here and a little bit of her race information, and that you can have an auction tab as well, but it is not as inclusive as the Equine Line. This is where the dam search is. If you're looking for any unnamed horses as well, you can find through here on Equibase. And then you can add them to your virtual stable. And then this is the same mare on that pedigree query. And again, you just need to be a little bit careful on what you're searching on here, because anybody can go in and add stuff. And then from a commercial standpoint, we do have sales companies here in Lexington that we sell our thoroughbreds at. The timing of those sales for the breeding stock are in the fall and the winter. And during those sales, you will find potential mares to compete in the RRP broodmare division, or if you are just wanting to get a broodmare in general. Some of the things to keep in mind attending that sale, if you're not familiar with how sales work, is that a lot of these consigners will not have had these mares. So if you come from a sport horse background where you view your horses as more of pets and you would know everything about them, these consigners are probably not going to have that background information for you. But it's not to say that they won't be able to find out information, but these empty mares towards the end of the books even, and things like that, they're most likely going to be coming from farms elsewhere to their consigners at the sales grounds. But one of the benefits from purchasing from a sale is you do have some of the protection from the sales companies. They'll be able to announce if it's a cribber. You'll be able to go and evaluate the horses there on the sales grounds yourself, or you can hire an agent to do that for you, to try to find you something that looks a little bit more sound, has good feet, is tall enough for you. does have all the mares in one location there for you to come look at. It's a little bit easier than shopping online and, you know, having to buy sight unseen on Facebook or Equine or anything like that. Is there any questions?
Lights are going to come on.
Yeah.
Here we go.
They don't need to see me. Hillary, what kind of documentation, if you're going to be looking at a broodmare at a sale, you know, we know that horses of racing age, there's typically an X-ray repository. Is that the same thing that's available for broodmares?
Repository films in the sale, but it is not a requirement for broodmares, and you're going to be pretty hard pressed to find a broodmare with that at the sales grounds. But they will have like a reproductive statement in there as far as their status is concerned, and then they do also have to announce if they're a cribber and what their status is on the sales ground, whether they're barren or aborted or something like that. That will all be announced there in the sales rings. But unfortunately, most broodmares are not going to have any kind of radiograph films in there.
Do you have any suggestions for, you know, I know that we have some people here today and watching online that are part of the aftercare industry that might be interested in kind of taking more broodmares into their program. Do you have any suggestions for screening potential adopters or buyers and their suitability to be taking on a broodmare?
Yeah, so that's something that I struggle with sometimes when I'm listing them, because I do find that the broodmares take a little bit more than something straight off the track, just because they have been off for so long. And I've been surprised to have people reach out thinking that a broodmare would be a great first restart project, especially for a child. I don't think that would probably be the best way to go for most mares. Again, I'm speaking generally here. There's, of course, going to be some mares out there that'll be perfectly fine for it, but just given the careers that they've had and being turned out and they can be a little bit pushy and a little bit tough. And they do tend to come along pretty quickly in a program, but I'm not so sure that that would be the best thing for like a child. I like to ask any of my buyers, really screen what their past history is and what experiences they have. If they don't have any off-the-track experience, I tend to try to steer them into another direction, just because I think that it's most beneficial to have somebody that has both the racetrack experience behind them to at least some extent, just because these mares tend to, just in that initial transition phase, tend to be a little bit pushier, especially coming from some of the bigger farms where they live a lot looser of a lifestyle.
The marketing part is always RRP's favorite subject, so if I'm dominating this, please let me know. Are there any questions from the audience?
What do you do with the mares that you can't find time for?
So I personally don't have the mares. I do the broodmares themselves. I bought one and resold, but most of them I list for farms, and I make it a point to only work with farms that will take care of the mares themselves. So if it's not, and I'll be very upfront with them, if it's a mare that I don't think that we can find a good, suitable long-term home for, I won't do the listing for them. And I tell them it's in their best interest to keep the horse on their farm, or you know, in a drastic way, even a euthanasia option if it's, you know, if it's an older mare that's having some soundness issues and things like that. But I won't recommend trying to move along a horse that I don't think is suitable for a second career or a third career.
You said for soundness wise, there is no
Yeah.
But would you say that like doing a pre-purchase exam would reduce the risk significantly of purchasing and not knowing?
Yeah, I think a pre-purchase exam on any horse reduces the risk, but specifically the broodmares, just because they're not in any kind of work, whereas a racehorse at least has been going to the racetrack, or even if it's been off the track for a few months, you have it's still pretty fit and you have a general idea of it. The broodmare side of things, just they're going to be pretty significantly let down for the most part. I would recommend doing pre-purchases on them, even if it's just a simple one, to even get some flexations. I always recommend that people x-ray feet when they're doing any of my pre-purchases, just so that everybody's happy with the end product. I don't like any of my buyers to be unhappy with what they purchase from me.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate that, x-ray feet on a broodmare.
Yes.
And do a breeding exam. Like those two, like, cause Karen talked about that a little too, right, but I would definitely x-ray feet. Cause they
Yes.
have a higher risk of having had a lemon-indic event, so. Sorry, I'm usually
No,
loud, but I
you're
forget
good.
there's people on the live stream. So yeah, again, I'll reiterate for the 4th time that x-ray feet for a broodmare, definitely, and then do it. We've had mares come into our program that came in through avenues that they didn't think they were pregnant, and they actually were. So you want to find out as well, do an ultrasound. Just get a breeding soundness exam on them, and that's the rare case. That's when we're pulling from a kill pen, right? So
Yeah,
right.
I have
It's
a bit of a different.
Not from when you're working with a farm that you have a relationship with. They're really not going to pass along a mare that they really wanted to breed and now pass along a baby and oops, sorry. But it's still just depending where you're coming from and what you're doing. That's Hillary. I totally like feet, and
If you can only afford to do 4 x-rays, x-ray 4 feet. That's what I always say.
Hillary, we always admire when it's time to list horses coming out of the Thoroughbred makeover. You do such a thorough job, and we kind of hold you up sometimes as being an ideal reference. And I love your statement about like better no photo than a bad photo, and that's something that we feel like sometimes we're saying until we're blue in the face.
Yes.
And sometimes the mares that we're seeing, that you're listing, aren't immediately recognizable as being a broodmare. And we talked a little bit about timing of listing. Can you talk about just generally, is there an optimal timeline between when you make the decision to retire and how much time you can give them to kind of just lose a little bit of weight and recondition a little bit so that they're looking their best when they go to get listed?
Yes. So if it's had a foal this year, I won't list them until they're weaned and dried up, because I find that most people purchasing these broodmares, it might be their first time doing it, and I don't want to send them a mastitis case. So I make sure that they're like fully dried up and had a break from having that baby before I'll even list them. And that weaning process will tend to suck some of the weight off of them. Most of these farms will quit feeding most of these mares as we're weaning them, just to help cut down on their milk production. So that always helps suck up that belly a little bit, and they're just on the grass for the summer. So that typically will happen. We're starting to wean right now, now through the next like 4 months or so. And then I would typically start listing my mares like right around the September sale. If they've had foals this year. If they just didn't get in foal this year at all, I will list them right away.
Just a question about, so obviously most people are thinking horses, they think purpose, so therefore riding as a second career. Like, are you rehoming mares that are going on in other areas? Like, what other options do you focus primarily on they're going on to a riding home?
I try to focus on the ones that are sound enough for riding homes. I think that it gives them the best chance to have a safe, long-term home doing that. I have rehomed quite a few into a select group of recip situations. I tend to stray away from the larger recip places, just because I want to, again, ensure that these mares are not going to end up somewhere bad 10 years from now. So I have done a lot of research into who I would recommend sending some of these mares to, but at least does give an option for the mares that aren't capable of being ridden for one reason or another. But for the most part, I'm trying to only list ones that are suitable for riding homes right now. I just like that to try to get them into that safest, longest term home.
I think that's definitely, it's a tough topic because there's not the greatest clear answer right now. And I think when we talk about timing of retirement, that's why it's so important. Just in the same way that the one last race, we want to avoid the one last race, the same kind of logic applies with deciding when to retire a broodmare, so that you can improve the outcome if you make a decision in a timely manner, so that, you're not getting to, like, you've tried for 4 or 5 seasons or something, and the mare is now in advanced age. Like, you could have improved the outcome for that mare by making that decision earlier. We touched a little bit about shopping at sales. Do you have any just kind of general etiquette tips for somebody that is not versed in that universe, and anything to watch for in terms of like red flags?
Yeah, so especially with the topic of empty mares being at a sale, there's going to be a lot of red flags attached to them, because for the most part, if they check empty, they wouldn't be going to the sale. So that can definitely be a tough one. But then there's also situations where, the owners are just either dispersing everything, or there's a partnership conflict and they have to put the horses through a sale. So it's not to say that every empty mare in the sale is coming from a questionable situation, but there could definitely be some red flags there that I would move forward with caution with. I would definitely recommend going in person to see them so you can see how the mares are there. I would not recommend a non-industry person try to purchase anything online through a sale. I think it's really important that you get on the ground and see it yourself, or hire an agent to do that. There are bloodstock agents that are there that you could pair up with and hire to help you through that process. From the commercial standpoint there, like Keeneland and Fasey-Tipton, you do need to have if you are going to go in person and try to buy a mare out of the sale, there is a whole process you have to do to be able to do that. So you have to get a line of credit with the sales company. So just keep that in mind if that's the intent behind attending the sale, if you're doing it on your own without an agent.
Thank you. Any other questions from the group? Or Kyle? Commentary?
I try to do them under 15. I find that keeps kind of like Doc mentioned earlier. There's going to if that advanced age group there is going to have other issues on top of just the reproductive issues or non-commercial pedigrees, things like that. Chances are they're going to have start to get some arthritis and some other pain. And I don't know about you guys, but like I wouldn't want to try to repurpose myself right now into anything else. So it can get a little tough with some arthritis as you're getting older. So I don't really know if I'd want to put some of those older mares through too much of a competitive riding home. Now, if you're thinking of taking it on as more of a personal project and to have something to just enjoy yourself, there's no reason that an old mare can't do that. I mean, I have a polo pony at my farm who's 31 this year and still does lessons. So there's and he's the soundest thing on the farm. So there's no reason that age alone wouldn't do it. But I would, generally speaking, those older mares are going to have more of a problem. And just with my goal and my business, it doesn't line up with what I'm trying to do.
So I assume that, is it obvious when the mares are there, the broodmares are there at a sale, that they're not like, I know people who have bought broodmares out of consignments and things, liquidation and things like that, and kept them as broodmares. So obviously, well, I would think price might be one indication, but are there other, is it?
Oh yeah, well, putting like if you catalog the mare as in full and then she's empty on her pre-sale check, that's going to be a significant loss for the seller. So most sellers are going to scratch the mare out of that sale, put her back in full and try to sell her again. But again, we're talking more about the more commercial mares at that point. If it's a mare at the end of her career or the mare that's pedigree has proven to be not worth continuing on, they might leave her in there. And at which point the price is going to be significantly lower in those situations. And those poorer pedigreed mares are going to be towards the later books anyway. So if the empty mares, and there's not saying, reason to say you couldn't buy a mare in foal either and foal her out yourself and then use her, retire her yourself at that point. You can get a twofer. But those later booked mares are going to be, in my opinion, the ones that will be shopped for this type of thing versus, you know, a book one mare that ends up being empty.
I think I'll add a plug for, so in the fall, I always go to the sales and shop, and people can follow Mareworthy, and I'm happy to have you come along. I'm sure Hillary probably would even say, hey, if you're, you know, it's one of those things of going and just experiencing the sale, maybe not even to buy, but to understand it. That's something that we do as education arm for Mareworthy, is to get people out to the sales, seeing the broodmares. So the November sale at Keeneland I'm always at. Those last days of the books, I'm usually there watching the mares that sell for $1,000.
Yeah.
And bringing them to our farm, or finding a place for them to go, or tracking them afterward. Because those are the ones that, you know, if they're over 16 and they're selling for $1,000, as a personal side, not on our nonprofit, we also do breed a small book of mares. One of them was a mare I got for $1,000 last day of the sale. I put my hand up just because she had a nice pedigree, and she had fertility issues. She had her first foal this year, and her last foal because it ended up being a C-section. So, and it was an emergency C-section because her pelvis was too narrow. So there, you know, those things of like, she will now be looking for a riding home. She's 7 and very, you know, sound and ready to go on. So she'll get donated to Mareworthy, and then Mareworthy will adopt her out. So I think a lot of it is finding those channels. We've adopted some even that a 24-year-old mare that went on to be a nanny. Those are the harder ones to place.
Yeah.
So to Hillary's point completely, when they're 15 or under, a lot easier to find a home. 16 and over,
Tough. Yeah.
tough. But there's an outlet for it. It's just finding the right.
Yeah, and I'll touch on that too. Like if it's somebody that I know personally, I have no problem moving one of those mares into it. It's just the thought of like blindly advertising that online is a tough pill for me to swallow for it. But
We're at this point, all of our mares are available for the person who asks, but we're not actively promoting the adoptables. Because you know what, you want to come and get one of our sanctuary mares and take it to your farm, and you're a reputable person that I know really well, that's a different story.
And to touch on what Kyle said too, I typically have a consignment in those sales, so I won't be walking around doing anything fun. But you guys are always welcome to swing by and hang out on sale day and stuff like that if you're interested in seeing like the consignor aspect of it as well.
To our third session of the day.